It's my privilege to welcome you back to the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm Adam Posen, the Institute's president, and we are very privileged today to have a speech by Vice Chancellor Olaf Scholz of the Federal Republic of Germany. The Institute has been, both as a number of individuals and as a research organization, deeply involved in transatlantic relations and EU developments basically since its founding. A number of us have personal ties to Germany and have worked in Germany and worked with German officials. Our colleague, German Zettelmeier, the Dennis Weatherstone Senior Fellow here, of course, was chief economist in the German Economy Ministry recently. But it still remains a special treat, or maybe for that reason it is a special treat for us, when a senior German official reaches across the Atlantic, reaches out to our audience, and attempts to give us an understanding of where they see the world going and where the world should go. And based on my conversation with Minister Scholz, I think we're going to be perhaps not completely satisfied, but definitely stimulated and urged forward by his vision. Vice Chancellor Scholz has been the Federal Minister of Finance for roughly a year now. He's also been acting chairman of the Socialist Democratic Party since February of last year. Previously, he served as first mayor of the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg for 7 years, from 2011 to 2018. And he was vice chair of the SPD parliamentary group in the Bundestag from 2009 to 2011. Importantly, he was also federal minister of labor and social affairs in a previous coalition government from 2007 to 2009. And as I was reminded, during that period, in the early days of the crisis, in part under his leadership, Germany undertook a set of labor market programs, which we came to refer to as Kurzarbeit, short work. And when I was sitting there at the Bank of England during the crisis, and I know counterparts in the Obama administration were trying to figure out how we could emulate this, and none of us successfully did, but it was a brilliant step forward in terms of flexible fiscal and labor market policy. And so we are going to hope to hear more of that kind of creativity and positive force from the minister today. So may I invite to our stage Olaf Scholz, please. Thank you, Vice Chancellor.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Looking at all of you, I decided that I will shorten my speech a little bit at the one or the other opportunity, and then we will have a better chance to discuss with each other. I think this makes a lot of sense. It is a pleasure to be here with you in Washington, and at a time when rules-based multilateralism is increasingly under threat, it is essential that we uphold international cooperation. The IMF's spring meeting, as a key date on the multilateral calendar, is the right occasion to do just this. It gives my colleagues and me the opportunity to talk, not only at the IMF, but also within the G7 and G20 frameworks, about the state of the global economy and potential risks and opportunities that call for coordinated action. Of course, we discussed Britain's exit from the EU and its potential economic effect. Brexit will cause some disruption. To mitigate the fallout for the European and the global economy, we, the EU and its member states, have put in place precautionary measures, and we will continue to deal with the situation as it evolves. I'm very happy that there has been now a postponed decision and there is more time for getting something which is a solution. I think the British system is very much influenced by the idea of having no bipartisan cooperation. I think the last time they did something like this was during the Second World War, and then they haven't started so far. And now I think it is a question of national interest where this would be not the worst idea. The United States has always been a place of fascination for many Europeans. Germans are no exception. Helmut Schmidt, the former chancellor and fellow social democrat from Hamburg, famously mused that if he ever had to immigrate, he would probably go to America. Our cultural ties and the way we view each other, our common values and political challenges have undoubtedly played a part in forging the Transatlantic Partnership. We have a unique relationship that goes beyond cooperation based merely on self-interest. A transatlantic friendship that has always withstood temporary differences of opinion because it is built on a foundation of shared principles. Democracy, the rule of law, the freedom of the individual, the market economy, and social welfare. Although we may have slightly different views on how to best balance those last two concepts. We share the political philosophy that democracy means more than majority rule and that it requires the protection of the legitimate interests and expectations of minorities. Minorities matter. Americans and Europeans agree that a free society is made up of active and responsible citizens and not just of economic actors. We know that democracy is about benefiting society as a whole and about promoting its prosperity. It is not about favoring particular groups or making decisions on the basis of a quid pro quo. I believe that such a transactional approach to politics runs counter to our shared core values, and that if such an approach is applied to foreign policy, it cannot create true partnership. International politics is not a zero-sum game where in order to win, someone else has to lose. Instead, everyone would lose in the long run. Security and stability for one party cannot be built on insecurity and instability of the other party. True, stable partnership ultimately is based on a set of common values and the common goals that they create. Despite our differences, we, Europeans and Americans, usually tend to end up on the same side of an argument in the international arena when it comes to matters of democracy, the rule of law, or the freedom of the press. We may often make the case for democratic principles out of a sense of morality, but this is good strategic and economic policy as well. I'm firmly convinced of that. Good institutions lead to good policy. Applying this maxim to the field of international relations pays off in the long run by laying the groundwork for new partnerships, by increasing economic and political stability, and by fostering sustainable global growth. And so, a comprehensive strategic view must necessarily go beyond security policy. Who would question the geopolitical significance of China's intense global investment activity and of its ambition for economic and technological leadership? China's re-emergence has lifted millions from poverty and for decades has driven global growth. At the same time, we must acknowledge that it has shifted the global balance of power. By this realization must not lead us to knee-jerk reactions that will damage the global economy. Protectionism is not the answer. Neither should we consider side deals that will undermine our international economic framework. Therefore, Europe and the US need to engage constructively with China, ideally in a coordinated manner as transatlantic partners. We must safeguard fair trade practices and fair competition in order to defend a level playing field. That requires a clear view and clear action. But we should also make sure that in our efforts to protect the integrity of our markets and principles, we do not end up doing more harm than good by turning against each other on the basis of short-sighted nationalist arguments or instruments. Ladies and gentlemen, trade, and not just in the context of China, is a good example of a policy area where the United States and Europe should be natural partners by virtue of our shared values. I'm aware that trade negotiations tend to be governed by economic interests, size, and bargaining power, and I'm under no illusion that US-EU trade talks could be an exception to the rule. Our past and current trade disputes attest to the robustness of our trading relationship. Nevertheless, on balance, both the United States and the EU have been advocates of an open and fair trade. I believe this is a matter of principle. It's not just about achieving some short-term economic gain. It's not about the art of the deal. Therefore, the EU and the US should treat settling our current dispute as a priority and aim for a more open, extensive trading relationship. We should work together to strengthen the multilateral trading system, which would, I'm convinced of this, serve both US and EU strategic interests, although the idea might be a hard sell for some, both here in Washington and in Europe. Our joint efforts should include serious attentions to international labor and environmental standards. They are not just meant to ensure a level playing field. At their most basic level, standards on trade practices are also meant to protect human rights. And if we want a sustainable growth path for the global economy, we need to consider some steps towards a more equitable distribution of the profits of globalization, both internationally and domestically. And maybe we shouldn't get too caught up in discussions about current account balances. In Germany, a lot has been done recently in that regard, including a strong increase in public investment as well as significant growth in wages and private consumption. Still, centering the trade debate on a single number distracts from the real issues at hand. Rather, we should focus on the concrete measures that are necessary to promote open and fair trade. The issue of fairness brings me to the global tax system. We all agree that a democratic state needs sufficient tax revenue. And so multinational corporations that shift their profits to jurisdictions with favorable tax regimes with the aim of minimizing their tax burden or avoiding taxes altogether present us with a problem. A fair tax system has to be applied uniformly, not just to businesses that are unwilling to engage in tax avoidance or to companies whose profits are less mobile than those of some multinationals. There is international consensus that something has to be done. Building on the progress that we have already made through the BEPS initiatives against base erosion and profit shifting at the OECD, work is underway to reform the global tax system. Different approaches exist. Within this debate, I'm a strong advocate of an international minimum corporate taxation. This idea is not about doing away with tax competition completely, but rather about establishing a framework to prevent harmful tax dumping. While difficult questions remain, especially on how to tax digital businesses or how to address the allocation of taxation rights, I'm confident that we will be able to agree on a plan by 2020 that will include minimum taxation. As the chair of the relevant OECD working group, Germany is working to move this discussion forward. Ultimately, we must ensure that everybody makes a fair contribution to financing public goods. At the same time, we should also be providing them in a smart and efficient manner. Cooperation is an important factor in achieving this. For us Europeans, there are many European public goods that can be better provided through the EU. Yet, some questions ultimately require a global approach. In these cases, coordinated US-European efforts would go a long way. Putting the global environment on a sustainable path and dealing with the issue of man-made climate change come to mind as examples. However, the United States might not be on the same page as Europe and large parts of the global community regarding these questions yet. One of the most important examples of how essential US-European cooperation is in supplying a public good is, of course, security. And this is a question which has been debated in Transatlantic Partnership, and I'm not going to avoid it. We have actually been heading in the right direction. In a move that will benefit NATO, the EU has taken steps to strengthen its defense capacities. And we already do spend more money on defense. Germany alone has increased its defense budget by over 15% compared to 2017. Major change does not happen overnight. And with the argument heavily centered on defense spending quotas, perhaps this issue is another example of a single number distracting the debate from the fundamental matters at stake. We should focus minds on smart ways to increase our capabilities. The most efficient way to strengthen European defense is to further improve European collaboration, both with regard to the development and the procurement of military systems, and also with regard to operations. Progress might require some time, but concentrating our efforts on European defense cooperation rather than relying on solo measures promises a much higher return in terms of effectiveness. While defense readiness is essential, we should not underestimate the crucial importance of development and investment policy for our international influence and for safeguarding global security and stability. This is an area where Europe brings a lot to the table, strengthening the rules-based international order and furthering the interests of all democracies, including the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, the following holds in many areas besides security policy. In the interest of our joint cause, namely upholding the values of Western democracy, we need a strong and stable European Union side by side with a powerful but principled United States of America. Let me assure you that Germany is mindful of its responsibility towards the European project. We are aware that everything we do and everything we don't do impacts our neighbors. A strong and united Europe is our primary national concern. Therefore, countering nationalist, anti-European and unilateralist narratives must be a political priority for us. If we are to assume a key role in advancing Europe, there will have to be broad and stable support for doing so. Germany's role needs to be that of a broker of compromises. We cannot be seen as dominating European policy, and we have no desire to do so. And while Franco-German cooperation is essential, ultimately, EU policy must balance the interests of all member states. We cannot and we will not allow the EU to be split into different camps. Those who predicted that the Brexit referendum would be the beginning of the dissolution of the European Union have been proven wrong. During the negotiations, we have seen that when push comes to shove, we Europeans stand together. And so I'm confident that we can reform and further develop the EU in the coming years. To this end, the upcoming European elections will be extremely important, just as it will be important to move past the current Brexit quagmire and establish a new relationship with the United Kingdom. I will continue to work towards making further European progress a reality and increasing the stability of the economic and monetary union. Europe must come together first and foremost for the sake of Europe's future. But Americans should, and they mostly do, realize that it is vitally in their own strategic interest as well. On this basis, I have no doubt that the Transatlantic Partnership can weather its current atmospheric disturbances, and that in a changing world, Europe and the United States will remain the closest of partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Scholz. There are so many ways this conversation could go, and given our very large and very distinguished audience, I'm sure we'll be taken in all of them at some point. Let me pick up on a few things in your remarks, if I could. First, one thing that struck me, and we are all grasping for something positive, your statement that we could have a international agreement on minimum corporate tax, on digital taxation by next year, sort of stood out to me as something potentially very favorable. Could you say a bit more about what kind of parameters you think that would look like? Obviously, it's subject to negotiation. And perhaps more importantly, what will be the effect on the German economy, the American economy, on the developing countries if we get the kind of deal you're talking about?
So we are discussing intensely in all the international organizations, the OECD, G7, G20, and obviously also within the European Union about the question how we can deal with the new questions coming up to our states, because it's obvious that we will be not able to serve our economies and our people if the strongest partners of this game are avoiding taxes. No one is liking to pay them, but in the end, someone must do so, and it's better those who have some strength do it than those who are not capable to pay for all the things that are necessary for our states. So I think there is an increasing understanding that this will not work, and I learned very much that this is also due to the United States. We very much looked at the corporate tax reform that had been done in the United States. But one of the aspects of it was a unilateral approach on a minimum taxation. But much better it would work if we could have a global agreement about how to deal with this question. But the outcome of the decision the United States already did or took is that it is absolutely likely that we get a consensus on the question because we are on the same path. And this might be the reason why we get something which many people in our country still think that this is something of a very far future, but I think it will be something that we can reach very soon. Yesterday, I heard from some relevant ministers and secretaries in the G7 and G20 level that they say it might be that we will have to find a consensus about the way how we do this within 6 months to be successful with the summer meeting of OECD the next year. And this, I think, is really a progress. There is a proposal developed in the German Ministry of Finance and proposed to the international audience together with France that on minimum taxation that I think has a lot of acceptance by all the others. And there's one pillar in the OECD where we discussed this question and it might be the outcome of the debate. So this is quite something we could work on. The second question and the second pillar in the OECD debate and also in G7, G20 and IMF, you heard the speech of Lagarde on that case, is how we tackle the question of taxing digital economy. And this is not that easy.
Right.
Because we have an international agreement about taxing corporates, which in the end, for avoiding double taxation is necessary. And this is saying that we tax the corporates where goods are produced, where services are brought out, where inventions are made. And this is not just the case because it was invented when the OECD was just a club of the most developed industrial countries, but it makes sense. We have, on the other hand, we have to understand that the allocation of taxing rights is a question that is on the global table and that there is a debate and that the new digital companies are raising the question again. Because, for instance, in Europe, having been not that successful with developing global platforms, there is now a debate they wouldn't have had 10, 15, 20 years ago about the question whether it could work that they earn a lot of money but pay no tax in Europe, more or less, if you compare it to the revenues they get from the activities over there. The question is, do we find a way to do it? There are proposals coming from India and China, and obviously they propose to tax it in their countries and not just digital and with digital companies, but also with all the goods and services so far. I don't think that this will work because there is some sense in the way how we tax corporates today. There's There's a UK proposal which is working on user participation, which I think is very delicate and not really working, because if we remember the debate we already had in Europe about how we can assure that those who are producing contents get their fair share of the income. You might understand what this will mean if you have to develop a technique, finding out where is the user contribution. And so this is, I think, quite difficult. And there are some others also proposed by the United States. I think in this field, we don't have the real good solution yet, but we have to find it, and it will not make sense to take more years. We should find the way how to tackle this year, and then we can do it.
Thank you. It was extremely comprehensive. I appreciate it. Along the way, also in your remarks, you mentioned, as German officials are wont to do, let's not spend so much time on these imbalances and trade surpluses and so on. And as non-German officials and non-German people are wont to do, I will summarize that there are a lot of people who don't quite understand why Germany needs such a large trade surplus, such a large fiscal surplus, and doesn't it seem to make things worse for Europe and thus for Germany? So what is it, given that we've all been through this cycle of discussion many times, what is it about the reasons for the current German state of balances, fiscal and international, that you think us stupid Americans just don't get? What is it you wish we understood that we don't understand?
So I just would like to share some ideas, my personal ideas on that question.
Yeah.
The first is about Europe. I think we really have a change in the economy, and possibly those researchers are not anymore right, looking at in the next time 27 member states of the European Union, and looking for the Finnish, the Swedish, the Polish, the Portuguese, the Spanish, or the German economy, because we are much more a European economy as anyone thinks in Europe and outside of Europe. And looking at Germany is much more, if you would look at one of the states in the United States, maybe California, and then you will not discuss about trade balances between California and the rest of the United States. Or in the case of Germany, to be more fair, it would be as if California, the state of Washington, and New York would be one state and right in the center of the United States and not bothering for the rest.
Right.
This will not work. And this is why my approach to European policy is that we are relevant for progress and compromise, and we are not a party going to the rest saying that we have a lot of citizens and a lot of economic strength and that our ideas always are very intelligent. We should try to find out that we are relevant for the compromise in the European Union. But coming back to this economic question, I think it's worthwhile to follow the idea which I'm explaining to you. There is more a European economy than a national one, and this changes the perspectives also on trade imbalances. And if you go around as a finance minister of Germany and speak to the prime ministers of the different European states or the finance ministers, you will find out that they're very much bothering about the German economy because it's critical for their development. And you will find out that they understand something which possibly has not been figured out by economic researchers. They say a huge lot of the plants in our country are coming from German companies. The famous big ones and small, medium-sized Mittelstand companies. And we understand these companies as European companies, and the activities they do are important. So one of the proposals or the claim or the things that are said about the German economy, for instance, is that there is not enough private investment.
Right.
Possibly this is a wrong view if you understand that the same companies invested quite a lot, but possibly to build a plant in Portugal and to build a plant in Spain and to build a plant in Czechia or in Poland or so on. And if you learn that after Europe came together, we now have a situation where there is a shortage of labor in Czechia and Slovakia and Poland and the Baltic states coming to go there. that you have good development in Spain and Portugal, you will find out that it is much more likely you will get better results looking at this whole European economy, but to single countries. This is the one thing. The second is, there has been taking a decision by many corporates in Germany, and especially the famous Mittelstand, which is a company of 500,000 or 2,000 employees, being successful on the world market with 3 or 4 competitors, one possibly from Japan, one might be from the north of Italy or from Finland or from the United States. And this is that they met the challenge of being globally competitive. It is not just their neighbors, it's not exports and imports to the countries right at their border. And this is a reason for the success. This is a reason for why, when there is a slower growth in the global economy, we will have slower growth in Germany, because we cannot avoid it. And you should understand that there is also one thing different with the German economy as many people view it. I learned that researchers are not happy with the idea, but there are some that are making schedules where they say, we put together exports and imports. We add them. And then we look at the different countries. And then you will find out that Germany is not just a big exporter, but also one of the biggest importers in the global economy. And this links together and is a different economic model to many other countries. So I think it's not very easy just by changing figures to change something in this question, because it's individual decisions by individual companies who are successful in the global market.
So let me move on from that then, in the spirit of your remarks about Germany not being this central player that demands everything, and you want compromise, and you want a functioning, unified European economy. There is a whole list of things other than figures. There are policies and institutions that have been put forward, including by some of my colleagues here at Peterson. There's issues of, could we get a European deposit insurance? Could we get a European safe asset? You've made some steps to expand a European fiscal capacity, but maybe there should be more. So again, asking you to explain something to those of us who may have a false perception. The perception seems to be that Germany is, not entirely, but for the most part, not accepting various proposals, multiple proposals to further integrate Europe. What is the alternative agenda on the economic front, just the economic front, that Germany would have? Or am I misunderstanding? Are these proposals you will accept in due course?
I could just ask what proposals you are speaking about, but
I can give you. I can cite you very specifically if you would like.
I know, but I will give an answer. And my question has some reason. The first is, we should understand that we made a lot of progress, which has not been realized. I would say even not in the European public. But after the last crisis, we built a lot of institutions which are now really able to act, which they would have not been during the crisis 2008-9, following the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy and things like that. So the first is, we built supervision authorities, which is looking at more than 200 European banks. And this is 80% of the balance sheets of the European banks. Is really relevant. We built a fund for the dissolution of banks, so that taxpayers' monies are not anymore questioned when there is a crisis of a really big bank in Europe. We now decided, and I worked very hard to get this solution, that this fund will have a backstop by the European Stability Mechanism, which is something like a European monetary fund. It has the capacity to lend itself 500 billion euros. to save a country. This is the reason for the ESM. And they were, and its predecessor were successful with that, helping Ireland, helping Portugal, helping a little bit Spain, helping Cyprus, and helping Greece. No one realized that the biggest country support for a single country losing contact to the financial markets was the program of the Europeans for Greece. It is not the bigger countries that got support by the IMF. And so there is some stability and strength and European solidarity for helping so, and all the countries are now out of the program. And this shows that we are able and capable to do something. Now we decided that this ESM should be a backstop for this bank fund. So it is much more stability we have now. And in this year, we agreed about 12 different regulations on the European level, which is a progress because I think in the years before it were 3 for 4 or 8 years. So you see, we are working very much. My view on the banking union and the financial markets union is that we already built a house, that even the woodwork is done with the roof, and now it's not just the rest which we have to do. And there are the questions on the table you are speaking about. But my view is that we have to stay a bit away and understand that this is not something which will be done in doing one step or the other, or something which is part of a necessarily bigger picture. My idea is, let us now look to the United States. Let us understand why, for instance, the FDIC is working well. And this is, which we learned quite successfully with the supervision of these bigger banks and the fund, that you need European supervision. And we need something which is identical between all the banks, even a bank which no one of us knows in the city we never heard about somewhere in Europe.
Right.
Must be under the control of something in someone in Europe if you want to have a common activity of saving them. It is not an idea that you can have all the advantages of cooperation, but
Right.
do not cooperate, which in this case means a European governance is needed. And so, without making a concrete proposal, because we are intellectually working very hard on thinking this through, I believe it is necessary that we understand, in a way, this will not work. We have to do the same as the United States, but we have to understand that we have to make it feasible that the banking market, that the financial market is working in the same way as it is in the United States. Otherwise, it will not work.
I completely agree with that. Let me, if I could, ask you one more question before turning it open to our audience, and I'm very grateful for you doing this on the record discussion with us. One topic which I believe, and I certainly hope, is current among you and your colleagues in the G20 is the issue of what will be the fiscal response in the next downturn. As ECB President Draghi has indicated, as Fed Chair Powell has indicated, as many of us on the more academic sidelines have indicated, we have deep concerns that the ability of any central bank to do much in the next downturn, if you're already at the zero lower bound and you've already done a lot of QE, is probably pretty limited. And so therefore, a lot of us think that fiscal policy is going to be needed. And just to try to drive the point home, you were very eloquent in your speech, and I know you mean it, about the need to forestall further development of nationalism, anti-European, right-wing feelings in Germany, in Europe, and frankly in the US. So there are a lot of us who are very concerned about the ability and the willingness of Europe, and therefore of Germany, to take fiscal action in the next downturn. Can you reassure me?
Yes, I can say something about that. For instance, about the capability of Germany in a crisis. But let me come back to the situation where we are today. We are not in a crisis. There is no downturn. There is a slower growth. This is something completely different. And this is what we hear from the IMF. We hear from all the international institutions. This is how we see it in the European Union and how we see it in Germany. So we have we are not now facing a situation like this. And if you look exactly to Germany, you will find out we have a shortage of labor. If 500,000 or 1 million people would attend at the German labor market, relatively skilled, and knock at the right doors of the right companies, they would be employed and increase the growth of our country. And so we are looking for them, and we are now doing some legislation because the free movement of labor within the European Union, which means we have an open labor market for 450 million, when the British will have left people, is not enough for doing what is necessary in some places, for instance, ours. And so I think this is not the situation we are in. Second, we are preparing ourselves for doing something, and especially being the biggest economy in the center of Europe. And this is that we reduce the debt to GDP ratio. Because when we fought against the crisis 2008-9, and I was, as you told the audience, a member of the cabinet then and was the Minister of Labor and did a lot, we increased our debt to GDP ratio up to 80%. Now we are going down under 60. And this shows that we will be able to do what is needed if there is a situation where it has to be done what is needed. But we are not there, to say it once again, for not being misunderstood. The third is, I think we have to be very concrete about what we can do in a crisis. And I just will tell you one anecdote. When I was Minister of the Cabinet, we discussed about programs to increase investment in Germany. And this was 2008-9, and the crisis was over somewhere in the end of 2009. I took office in Hamburg as head of the city-state, and the first things that followed the investment support for fighting against the crisis started to happen 2011, years after the crisis. So it is absolutely necessary that we think about something that works in a concrete situation. And my view is there is something we should know and have in our minds, but this needs that we change our view on the European Union quite a lot. So there is the left always claiming that there is not really transfer to those countries needing something. And there's the right telling us that we should not have too many transfer to other countries. The reality is we have. 80 to 90% of the public infrastructure investment in many countries of the East and the South of Europe is financed by the European Union. So if there would be a crisis and we would just make it feasible that they will continue with their already planned investments, that they could take place, this would have a really big impact on economic development. And this is one of the questions we should think about. On the other hand, we are now discussing to add to the multi-annual financial framework, which is the 7 years budget of the European Union, right, something like a fiscal capacity. There is a proposal from me and my French colleague. Right. I think as a politician, I would be happy to have it. I'm not looking at the size, right, because having it is something where you can make more of it if it's necessary. Some others are now thinking about if it's big enough, but this is not the right thing for starting. So we have to find something which is feasible, and we will.
Thank you for being so concrete. Let me open it up to the floor for questions. 2 ground rules, please. First, there's a traveling mic up front. There's a standing mic in back. Please wait to be recognized, but feel free to line up or wave your hand. Second, please identify yourself when asking a question, your name and your affiliation. And in the interest of getting as many questions in as possible, at least initially, let's take 2 questions at a time, and then the minister can decide how he wants to respond. So please. Okay. So there and there. Jessica in the blue shirt next. Sorry. That's him, the dark blue shirt.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead, please, at the back mic.
Yes, hi, I'm Steve Sylvia. I teach at American University. I'd like to ask you a political question, if you don't mind. Your party hasn't fared well in recent elections. Could you name one or two steps that your party should take in order to improve its electoral performance?
And before you answer, at the back mic.
Jacob Kierkegaard here from the Peterson Institute. Thank you, first of all, for an eloquent defense of multilateralism and the European project again. But at the same time, let me then ask you about these rumors we have about the formation of a potential German national banking champion. That seems to be a project that runs counter to many of the things that you spoke so eloquently about. And my question is really simple. Does a single good argument exist for merging Deutsche and Commerzbank that isn't, in fact, eerily similar to sort of Trumpian economic nationalism?
So you got two fun questions.
Yeah.
Why does your party have such problems? And that turns out to be the nicer one. So please.
I love both questions.
Good.
I will answer to the one. So, I think we should be absolutely aware that something is going on in our rich Western countries. So to understand the real situation of a progressive political force like the Social Democratic Party in Germany or other progressive forces in the Western of Europe or in the United States or in Japan or Australia, if you might look at that with a completely different political arena and systems, you will find out that there is something happened in the beginning of the 21st century, which is a little bit strange. Whilst billions of people are moving up to the middle class in Asia and other places, and they're as optimistic as our people were in the 50s and 60s of the last century, though they have not the same amount of money they can use. In our countries, the people lose confidence about the future. And even when they understand their own situation as quite well, they are not that sure whether this will continue to be so in the next 10, 20, 30 years, if they are young enough for thinking about questions like that. And they are not understanding whether this will be the same for the people they are alike or for their children and grandchildren and so on. And this has something to do with the development which is coming from globalization and which is coming from the fast technological progress we have in our countries. I think that globalization is bringing a lot of growth and wealth to the countries, even to ours. I think that the technical progress is absolutely necessary, that we should use it as something which is creating more wealth for all of us. But we must be clear that anyone will profit from this development. If I speak to entrepreneurs or some people of big corporates, I say there is nothing like a free lunch. If you believe you can have all this technical progress, globalization, and it will be much faster going on as it did in the past, without looking that the people of your countries are having a good chance to get their share of this growth and that they could have a safe life, you will not succeed. And if you look at left and right economist books, you will find in many cases a sentence in it which is saying we should pay money to those who are the losers of the economic game. But no one wants to get something for being out of the game. They want be part of the game. They want to have a chance to earn their own money, to be proud of what they do with their lives. They want to have respect. And as a democratic society, we have to do something which makes it clear for them that this will happen and that this will be the outcome of things. And this is my view why this is so difficult, and that we have to have new answers in a changed world, which is giving this progressive, confident, optimistic approach. But a society that should be open to the world, open to technical progress, open to progress, needs something like stability, and that the people understand that they have the right to be a part of those who win from this development. And so my view is that my party should find a way to show that we are ready to run the country, that we are good in defense questions and security in the inner, that economic development will be much bigger as with the conservatives. But, and that the European Union will be a good story. But we also are the one guaranteeing that the social welfare state and the chance for having your own income by your own labor is something that will be a reality for most of the people also in the future. If we would manage this, I think we will get enough support for doing so. And just to give you one more idea about this, we have the highest number of people employed in Germany ever. It's 45 million people working. It will increase. And at the same time, the people lose confidence. And if you look at the United States, you will find a similar situation. If you look at many other countries, you find similar situations. And so we have to get back confidence about the future. And if we do this, this is what we will have. Will have done our job, and we have chances in elections. The second question is something where I think you understand myself as professional enough not to answer, about something which is a private decision of private companies.
All right, I won't make a joke. At the back, Mike, and then there to Doug, please.
Yeah, Nicholas Veron here at the Institute, also at Bruggen in Brussels. Thank you, Minister, for what I thought was a very inspiring, also, I must say, toughly worded speech. I work on finance and banking here at the Peterson Institute, also on what you mentioned, the lessons to be taken by Europe from the FDIC experience in terms of resolving unviable banks, together with my PIIE colleague Anna Gelpern, so that's very topical. I was very inspired by what you said about the banking union. I think there are some very promising avenues here, but I have a kind of framing question for the debate, because the banking union was created, as many of us remember, in mid-2012, with the stated objective that it is imperative to break the vicious circle between banks and sovereigns. And for all the progress that has been achieved in banking supervision, in regulation, you mentioned that this vicious circle between banks and sovereigns is essentially intact in the Eurozone as it is now. So could you specify or explain a bit further to us how your vision for continuing the effort in reforming the European banking sector framework will achieve that stated objective, imperative objective, to break the vicious circle between banks and sovereigns? Thank you.
And before you respond, second question.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Excellent remarks. Doug Redeker from International Capital Strategies and Brookings. In your remarks, sorry?
It's on.
Sorry. In your remarks, you casually mentioned a hope that Germany and Europe would be able to resolve the ongoing trade tensions with the United States. I'm not looking for a roadmap to how that gets resolved, but I am curious on just how you would define those trade tensions. And that's not a curt question. What I mean is that until the current administration decided to potentially include autos as a national security threat, there was obviously room under TTIP and other trade agreement prospects for an improvement of trade between the United States and Europe, but nobody would have gone so far as to define it as a trade conflict. So how would you define the current trade conflict between the US and Europe?
Yeah. It's very difficult to say something about how the debate about trade or the discussion about trade is going on. I'm happy that we have it, and that President Trump and President Juncker decided to cooperate. And now we follow this path. I think this is the right way to do it. Tariffs are not creating wealth. This is my view on the things. And no one will be the winner. So why should we play a game where there is no winner? In this case, it does not depend on which side we are, because both will be the losers. And I think this is the thing that what anyone should have in mind. And as I said in my speech, I think the relations between the European Union and the United States should be always following the idea that we have common values. And that in a world of, I think, in the midst of this century, 10 billion people, the 450 million Europeans, EU Europeans, and the 300 and so million United States Americans will be just a small part. And we should understand that the world is becoming better when China and India and Indonesia and Brazil and other big countries of the world will gain their share of growth and wealth. It is not a threat to us. But we must be absolutely clear that we are working on having a world in where cooperation and not domination, multilateralism is the key of solving the questions, and where the questions of democracy and the rule of law and so on, which are relevant to the United States and relevant to the European Union, are something we can defend and possibly has a chance to be attractive to others in the world. And this is why I think it is a question where we have to discuss about interest. Yes, this is always the case, but there is something more in the relation between the United States and the European Union. This is that we have some common values, and this should be basis for all the things we do. In the question of what will be the next steps, I just think it makes sense to understand we did a lot. No one would have expected that we will have a backstop for this common fund for the big banks in Europe. No one would have expected that we form the ESM to something like an European Monetary Fund with similar, not exactly the same functions. This is a big development. And now we established a high-level working group, which is headed by the deputy ministers of Spain and Germany, to find out a solution, what will be the next steps. And I think at this stage, it is the right way to say, let's step aside and think about the situation. And this is why I mentioned possibly it makes sense to look at others who already solved in a completely different circumstance, in completely different circumstances, the questions that are on the table. And if we understand this, we will have a better solution. And this is what we do this year. I think it's a big task, but I'm quite optimistic to find a solution. Yes, I have thought about the question already, but I think establishing a working group does not mean that you tell the results. They should find out something.
Thank you. I believe the lady staying there, and this will be the last question given the minister's schedule.
Thank you. Katie Wang with NTD TV. It's an independent American TV network. My question is regarding China. You talked about China in your opening remarks. Recently, we have also seen a shift of EU's policy on China. It has started to recognize China as an economic competitor and also a systematic rival. So, but at the same time, we have seen that a country like Italy signed the MOU with China on the Belt and Road Initiative, and also Greece joined China on the 16+1 initiative. So I'm just wondering, going forward, how do you see that EU can more acting like a whole while facing China's growing influence and try to divide among the European countries? Thank you.
So this is a question where you can answer 5 hours about all the questions that might be raised. Thinking about that question, let me be relatively brief. First, I would say anyone should accept the European Union as a factor. China, Russia, United States. No one should think that there is a chance of dissolution and that we have a strategy that one could have a strategy of bilateralism or something like this. it is much better to understand that there is this European Union as one of the factors of the upcoming world. And this is good so, due to the reasons I already mentioned, saying that we have common values. Second, I think we should wish that many countries grow. A world where just the Europeans and the United States are strong and economically successful is not a good world. So we wish that the billions living in other places of our common planet will have a better life, will have growth and things like that. The only thing where we should work on, and we should be doing the right things and giving the right example, is multilateralism as a principle. And it is not a question of who is dominating, it's a question of if there is a fair cooperation between all the countries in the world feasible. To my point of view, you should never, you should know that I really believe that the end of the history is democracy, and that this is nothing which is a Western style, this is something people like, but it is themselves to find it out.
Wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Vice Chancellor Scholz. This has been a spectacular discussion, and thank you for engaging with us so frankly and fulsomely. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your thanks in the traditional manner. And we wish you and your country the best in your multifaceted world of G7, G20, EU, transatlantic, and multilateral. Keep it up.